an author whose column he writes daily is Mail on Sunday, which is one of my favorite, of course. He's a former foreign correspondent in Moscow, Washington. He has published books. He's a champion of print, and I'm delighted. He could only be one and only Peter Hitchens. Peter, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
Good to have you on the line, Peter. Tell me, first of all, before we go anywhere, you can come into an awful lot of stick, and you give back an awful lot of stick in your column. I was reading a thing the other day when you don't take abuse too lightly.
Well, my view is that I think people should be rebuked for abuse. This is an extraordinarily important moment in indeed national and European, possibly world history. And if people debate it, they should debate it seriously. So if people are abusive to me, I rebuke them for being abusive, but I am not, in general, abusive back. I've always had this thing which I call the presumption of intelligence. I presume that people ultimately are intelligent and capable of arguing. If they absolutely prove beyond reasonable doubt that they're not, I might give them a bit of ad hominem back just for fun and to correct their behavior. But in general, I think on this, we really have to stick to civility. It's very dangerous to think that there's only one point of view. Free societies are successful for a reason. They allow debate, and therefore they make fewer mistakes.
Peter, the thing that gets to me, and I've been through it myself, and I'm sure you have too, there doesn't seem to be any rules on comments on newspapers. It seems to me that anyone can write whatever they want and get away with it.
Well, I wouldn't go quite that far. What the problem has been really at the moment is not an absence of rules, but an absence of willingness to debate. There's been an extraordinary unanimity and acceptance of the basic premise that by shutting down the economy and strangling our personal liberty, we will defeat the coronavirus. I think this is very much open to dispute, and it ought to be disputed, and that people should discuss it. In fact, I think that my own current position is that the British Parliament should be recalled, so the whole thing could be re-examined with a proper debate in which people don't assume from the start the government is right, and that the one expert centre, Imperial College, whom they have consulted, are the oracle on this. There are other views from people equally skilled and experienced which are quite different, and they haven't been consulted. So I think that my whole point has been, this seems to me to be wrong. My own personal impression is that it is wrong. Let us have a proper national debate in which the institutions of the country take part, in which we examine it properly rather than rushing into what is already, I have to say, a tragically damaging series of measures. And the effect on the British economy of this shutdown is already catastrophic.
But Peter, I've heard,
losing jobs. It appalls me.
I've heard you refer to a comparison you've made to the flu epidemic, which we have every year, I suppose, and you quote large numbers. But of course, you've been told in no short words by Mr. Piers Morgan the other day that the flu epidemic is in no way comparable. There could be 30 million people dead by the end of the year with this. Certainly nothing like the flu epidemic. So there is no comparison. I don't think
it's guesswork, isn't it? We can, both of us, Piers Morgan and I, can both say what might or might not happen. I prefer not to, because unlike everybody else on the internet, I don't have the power of prophecy. I don't know how many people will die from this, and I don't see how anyone else can tell. These projections, which we're constantly bombarded with, are speculation. They're guesswork dressed up as science, and I think we should be very cautious about accepting them as fact. What's clear at the moment is almost nothing, because you can't get up-to-date figures. The government announces each evening the figures for the number of people who it says have died with coronavirus. The media report this as people having died of coronavirus, which is a completely distinct thing. And then people say, well, this is shocking. 500 or 600 people have died today. And when I point out, as I did the other day, that 1,600 people die every day in the United Kingdom on average, and that this is normal, people pretty much turn on me as if I've said something obscene. Whether these deaths which we're recounting, and I don't know the answer to this because I have not seen figures, and I don't believe they've been released. The question is whether these deaths that we've been counting are in excess of normal deaths, or within the usual range of daily and weekly deaths in the country. And until that's clear, it's very hard to say what these figures that are produced every night mean. What is absolutely for certain and totally irresponsible is the issue every night of the figures of the numbers of people infected. It can't conceivably be an accurate figure, since we have no, and never will have, I must say, never will have a system for checking whether people are infected with COVID-19 that's capable of coping with the entire population. For all we know, and a study from Oxford University suggested this possibility last week, millions of people have already had it, but we don't know. So coming up with a mortality figure and saying, well, there have been 33,000 people who've been infected and such a number have died, therefore that number is the mortality percentage, is a nonsense, as the brilliant Professor John Ioannidis of Stanford University has pointed out, and his work on this is devastating to the case of the panic market.
Peter, they know why, how people die. I mean, they have tests to carry out why they died, and putting out those figures.
Well, I don't know whether they do, actually, Maurice. If you ask, I don't believe there are any post-mortems taking place at the moment, anybody suspected of having died of or with COVID-19, for the obvious reasons of the infection danger, and so it's not happening. So, but on the other hand, if COVID-19 is found in the body of a person who has died, that person is recorded as having died with COVID-19, and the media then reported as them having died of it. And then they mention in a sort of undertone that these underlying conditions, which are present in so many of these cases, the underlying conditions tend to be extreme old age, cardiovascular disease, or lung disease.
Well, hold on, not only old age, Peter. It's not only old age.
I'm sorry.
No problem. I know you're very busy. It's not just generally old age.
It's not just of course, it's not just generally old age, but it is a major factor. You look at the Italian figures, and the numbers of people who are in great old age are large. This is partly, I have to say, a tribute to Italy, which has, through its health system and indeed its family structure, achieved a very major and rather laudable thing, and that people live longer in Italy, which is why it has such a high average age. But what they also do, and I think this is true of Spain as well, they also tend to live with their families, which means that if a disease is going round, then the elderly people who in Britain are much more isolated from the young, are isolated therefore from its circulation. But in a country such as Italy or Spain, older people are much more exposed to infection. So that has something to do with it. There are all kinds of other factors in Italy. I know a bit about this, including very, very severe air pollution. Did you know that in northern Italy, the air pollution is the worst on the Eurasian landmass outside China?
I didn't know that. No,
smoking is also extremely common.
Well, European, where I am in Spain.
We all know that.
Where I am in Spain, of course, smoking is very common as well. But Peter, surely that you've got to see around you at the moment, and not just put it down to sort of panic. The closing of airlines, the closing of businesses, the lockdown as we have, and you have as well. This is worldwide. Look what's happening in New York. Hundreds of thousands of people are now affected, and many are dying. Wait a
minute. So where are hundreds of thousands of people affected, and how many are dying?
Well, I haven't got the exact figures.
Well, this is the problem. People are jumping to conclusions. What I've said about this from the start is that it's not proportionate. The moment you start looking at the facts of the matter, they fade away from your gaze like a mirage approached along the road. You think you know, but then when you look it up, you find actually it's not as clear as it seems, and so particularly the mortality percentages being put about. And the other thing you do is, if you're careful, is you look at all the countries which have had outbreaks of COVID-19, starting with the People's Republic of China, moving on to South Korea, Hong Kong, Singapore, Japan. And in Europe, then you've got the Netherlands, Belgium, France, Spain, Italy, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and the United Kingdom and Ireland, and then the United States. And what you cannot find in any of these countries is any pattern suggesting that the response of several major governments of shutting down their economies and suppressing civil liberty is an effective way of fighting the disease. There is no such pattern, not even in terms of correlation is there any such pattern. For instance, the coronavirus declined quite sharply in both Hong Kong and Singapore after their governments took certain measures, but they took different measures. So we can't even judge from that that the coronavirus can be defeated by. We haven't got anything remotely resembling hard, scientifically testable evidence this extraordinarily rash, in my view, and certainly extremely radical action is justified. Excuse me, I'm going to close a window because somebody is mowing a lawn.
Peter, can I ask you this? If tomorrow, for example, the British government said, look, guys, we're going to lift the lockdown. You can all go out.
Could you repeat that?
If tomorrow, for example, the British government decides to lift the lockdown and say, guys, you can go out and do whatever you want, would you be happy with that? Would you border
Well, they can't do that. It would be impossible for them to do that. They've committed themselves so heavily to it.
No. Look,
it would be absurd for them to say.
I'm talking hindsight, Peter. I'm talking hindsight here. Would you be happy today to get on a tube, for example?
I mean, I would, yes, but here is the thing. Living in Britain at the moment is like living, for me, it's like living in a country that's been taken over by a religion different from my own. People obviously believe this stuff, and it's not for me to go around defending them. So I keep my distance. I do all the things that are required. I wash my hands. Sometimes when I go around the supermarket, I wrap a scarf around my face like a bandit.
We all do.
I think, well, if other people are worried about this, they think I'm going to infect them. I don't think that I am, and I wouldn't care much if they infected me either. But if that's what they think, then I'm.
Whoa!
I'm trying to influence a government which has taken a bad decision. You mustn't interrogate me as if I was a cabinet minister or a prime minister in charge of a policy who could change it tomorrow. That's not within my power. What I am is somebody whose job, frankly, is to raise dissent where it's necessary. I have raised it. I continue to raise it. I call for a recall of the British Parliament for precisely that reason. This thing should be discussed again before the mistake which has already been made is worse. The idea that no one could conceivably suggest that we should simply stop all this overnight. It would utterly demoralize huge numbers of people, and it would do immense damage. I'm not some kind of destructive maniac. I'm trying to engage in serious politics here, and you mustn't put it to me as if this was some kind of light-minded enterprise.
It's an open debate, Peter. I'm not putting it to you as if you're.
Well, I know, but I think that you, and I know it's not deliberate or indeed conscious on you. There does tend to be in the examination of this by the mainstream a view that those of us who dissent from it are in some sort of dangerous weirdos who are prepared to take horrible risks with other people's lives and so on and so forth. It's very telling in all the coverage of Sweden, for instance. Invariably, Sweden, which has decided not to crash its economy or strangle its liberties, is treated as if it was making a dangerous experiment. Whereas the countries which are actually crashing their economies, destroying jobs, wrecking business, and strangling civil liberties and filling the streets with armed police, these societies are treated as normal.
Peter,
the assumption, everybody makes the assumption, which it seems to me to be a very unwise assumption after 68 years on this earth, many of them as a journalist, the assumption that the government is right. Why would you think that? I know some people.
You've got to take the word from someone. And let me just talk to you about Spain, where I am right now. We have what's called total lockdown, and we look. I'm in Andalusia, in Andalusia, which we have in Marbella, the lowest death rate, I think, in Spain, and infection rate in Spain. You know that as a person of my age, I'm very happy with this lockdown. Now, it's a very serious lockdown here. You can't go out for a jog, as your Prime Minister says. You're not allowed to do that. You've got to keep fit in your own house.
Yeah, it's very similar in Moscow, where I have family.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know what their point of view is, but as someone like me, I feel protected and I feel safe.
Well, you're welcome to feel protected and feel safe, but what do you live on, Maurice?
You mean money-wise?
Yeah, where's your income stream coming from?
Well, I think that the British government have been very generous so far on what they're offering.
Well, the governments have no money, Maurice. The British government is being generous with our own money to us. Where do you think that's going to come from?
Well, this is the big problem. This is what I was getting to right now. I have a friend who's a very successful businessman who's suffering, his businesses are suffering in a huge millions. And he told me, and he said to me, which is quite true, us as humans will recover from this in time, Peter. We will recover from it. But what we won't recover for a long, long time is the economy. And that's
we'll never recover. The damage that's already been done to the major European economies is so profound that their position is permanently damaged. And the chief beneficiary of this, which is almost certainly going to be China. whose economic hegemony will be greatly increased. But I don't believe anybody intended that. But this is one of the things that is going to happen. All the Western countries, all the Western European countries, are going to have to get used to much lower standards of living, much lower wages, much higher taxation, much more official interference with their lives. And for what? As I keep saying, there is no scientific evidence, let alone proof, that this policy is actually making anyone any safer.
So you would have been happier for no lockdown?
Don't ask me about whether I would have been happier. It's not a question of happiness. I think that my government has made a tragic mistake. And I think permanent damage has been done, which will result in many ruined and indeed lost lives over the years. And I think I would call also on the statements of Professor Suchrit Bhakti, the professor of microbiological medicine from Mainz in Germany, a profound expert on this subject, who has warned over and over again how damaging this is, particularly to the healthy old, who, deprived of social life and exercise, are suffering terribly as a result of this, and he predicts appalling results as a result. It's on a utilitarian or indeed a humanitarian scale, the thing is an absurdity.
Yeah, can we just, while we have you on the line, Peter, and I'm delighted, and thank you very much, Mr. Peter Hitchens on the line, speaking from his home in London. Are you in London?
No, I'm in Oxford.
In Oxford. Your column will be out, of course, on the Mail on Sunday. You are, as I mentioned when I introduced you, you're an author as well. Can we just change the subject while I have you on the line, talk about your book, The World at War II?
I think I'd rather not.
Okay.
I'd love to talk about the book some other time, but if you'll forgive me, I think this matter is so serious.
Okay, you're right.
It shouldn't be mixed up with anything else. I have never in my life felt such a sense of foreboding about the stability of civil society as I feel now. I've felt for a long time, and I've written for a long time, that bad times were coming, that some sort of catastrophe was waiting in the wings for Western society because of its very foolish economic policies of recent years. And this, of course, is going on at the same time, virtually unreported. The huge stock market crashes, the declines in various major currencies, and the effects of those, which are being amplified by the mistaken policies of governments in shutting down what's left of their economies. But no, forgive me, I don't mean to be rude, and I hope you don't take it in that way, but I just don't think that this is an occasion to discuss something.
Peter, it was just that I had you on a line, and I thought that maybe it's good and nice to talk about your book. Okay, let's just get back for a few more moments. You're in lockdown now. How's your days there? Do you go out?
Fortunately, and a lot of this has to do with the very interesting comments of Lord Sumption, one of the former members of the Supreme Court, one of the most heavyweight, intelligent people in the country, who gave last year's Reith lectures, and is a person of considerable knowledge. He's also a distinguished historian. And he came out and said that he felt that this thing was disproportionate. And he also severely criticized the heavy-handedness of the police, who had gone way beyond their previous position of citizens in uniform and had begun to act as a government militia of the kind which other European countries, of course, have. And as a result of this, I think the heavy-handedness of the police in this country has largely declined. And people are, around where I am, people are by and large obeying and heeding what the government is saying. I live in a very pleasant, very prosperous city in southern England, where there are poor people, but fundamentally it's a very settled society. And people are doing their best to obey these rules, and so they do. We're not forced in the way that you are. I can go out, and thank heaven, and I can take exercise for the moment, which if I were deprived of exercise, I think my life would rapidly be shortened, because I've taken to particularly to bicycling and walking over the past 20 years as ways of maintaining my health, and I believe that they are the way in which we do it. So to be deprived of those by government diktat would be an absolute blow to me, and as I say, a threat to my life and health. But we don't have that here. I can go out, and I do.
Not yet. You don't have it. No,
we don't have it yet. No, and I think quite possibly the intervention of Lord Sumption has made it less likely. I also have a strong feeling this weekend, from straws in the wind, that the current government is actually beginning to have serious doubts about its own course.
Trump. his opinion, the way he's handling this.
Well, I don't care about him. I'm sorry. I've always said that he was an oaf, and nothing that he has done since has changed that. I don't think he veers so wildly from one position to another that one can't really make any consistent position of it, can we?
That sums up your opinion quite good. Peter, it's great to have you on the line. It's been many a year since we spoke last.
It has been a long time, yes. I'm glad we've been brought together again.
Yes, and love your opinions. I don't agree with them all.
Pay attention to them, because I think that if people do not fairly soon begin to raise grave doubts about these policies, the long-term damage to, and people say, oh, economists, so you care more about money than you do about lives and similar rubbish. I don't have any such view, but the economy, after God, is the thing in which we live and move and have our being. And saying, I care about the health service, I care about my fellow men, I care about the cleanliness of the air and the general standard of living, but I don't care about the economy, is saying, I love my house, but I don't care about the roof or the walls or the foundations. Because the economy is the roof, the walls and the foundations of everything that we do. And if we destroy it, then where, in Britain particularly, we're supposed to be worshipping the National Health Service at the moment, where will the money come from to pay for it? I'm absolutely sure it will face a grave decline after this, because the tax revenue of the government and the government's ability to borrow will decline to a point where it simply isn't, the health service is worse than it was before. We're supposed to be doing this to save the health service. It isn't doing so at all.
If this continues, Peter, do you see, and we've seen a tiny weeny bit of it here, a little bit of anarchy here, people breaking into a shop, that they need some food. If this goes on, do we see people like the yellow jackets we see in Paris? Do we see them starting to march your streets in UK?
I don't know what will happen. I gravely fear it. I think that, as I say, I live in an area which is predominantly middle class, and therefore people tend to be more self-restrained. As we know in Britain from the so-called riots of a few years ago, we have in this country a number of people who are not perhaps as committed to civilized behavior as the rest of us. And what I think will be a major test of this is when the weather grows hotter and people are confined to their houses, sometimes with small young families and with declining wages. And I'm not at all sure that it's going to be possible to get through that without there being some sort of disorder. And I gravely fear it, because I am terrified of civil disorder, and I would do almost anything to avoid it. But one of the things you sometimes have to do to avoid it is not to pursue policies which will lead to it.
Well, you keep seeing in the British press people like today, what's his name from the Arcadia Group, saying he's looking for the prop up of the British government. They see him as a multi-billionaire living in Monte Carlo and having $100 million yacht. They say the same of Richard Branson, who said
this is irrelevant to the matter.
It's irrelevant, but it's the uneducated who will rise up against it.
Well, that's quite possible. Yeah, but this kind of thing may become more common as a justification for bad behavior. The thing to do is to avoid reaching a position where the possibility of civil disorder arises. And I would say that one of the ways of doing that is to climb down from a policy which is grossly disproportionate and is doing grave damage both to society and to the economy and to liberty as well.
Well, look, you've been extremely generous with your time, Peter. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope and pray that one thing we both have in common, although I'm Jewish and you're Christian, we both have faith. And that's Indeed. Something that keeps us strong. Peter,
we're going to need it, I think.
Sorry?
We're going to need it, I think.
Well, I certainly try to use it every day, and I'm sure you do as well. Listen, thank you so much.
Who would be without it on any day?
Well, so many people are. Thank you so much for joining us here in Spain, and I look forward to speaking to you again and not leaving such a big gap between the times we spoke.
Well, there you are, you see. You've missed me without knowing it all this time.
I have, of course. I have. Thanks a lot, Peter.
All right. Thank you, Maurice. Take care.
Thank you.